The year was 1792, a bitter spring blooming across the Yorkshire moors, and with it came the rains, not the soft kind that nourished wheat or kissed garden beds, but the kind that flooded roads and turned stone paths to muck, the kind that drove men inside and made their thoughts louder than they wished to hear. And so it was at Graymore Hall, an estate as grand as it was forgotten, perched like a crown of sorrow upon the cliffs above the village of Dunmere. Its master, Baron Nathaniel Ashcombe, had returned from war, changed, not in body, but in spirit. The villagers whispered that he'd gone half mad, that he spoke to shadows, that the manor had grown colder since his return. But they did not know. They did not know of the girl behind the walls. Her name was Antoinette Merrick, though she had not spoken it aloud in months. The space she occupied was no more than 3 feet wide, a passage built by masons centuries ago, meant for coal runners and maintenance hands. Damp clung to its stones like regret. She had slept there, crouched in the narrow dark, curled around her own heart as though it might still break further. Antoinette had once been a governess, bookish, soft-voiced, forgotten in rooms full of silk and titled boredom, until the Baron's cousin, Sir Alistair, had cornered her in the rose corridor, and when she'd refused him, he'd called her a thief, a liar, a temptress. They'd believed him. Of course they had. No woman alone, no woman without dowry or name, had ever stood a chance against a man with a crest on his ring. And so, Antoinette had run, through the woods, through the storm. And when she'd seen Graymore on the horizon, she'd remembered the stories, that it was near empty, that the old Baron had died, that the heir was somewhere in France, broken and bloodied, or never returning at all. But Nathaniel had returned, and now he lived in the manor she could not leave. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps, pacing, doors opening, closing, muffled curses in the study, a groan of frustration in the music room. He had a pattern, she learned. Mornings in the library, afternoons on horseback, if the rain slowed, evenings in the West Wing, where the fire burned low, and his voice sometimes broke when he thought no one heard, but someone always did. From her place behind the panel in the drawing-room wall, Antoinette pressed her hand against the stone and listened. "Ridiculous," he muttered once after returning from the village. "They speak as though I've grown horns, because I walk alone, because I don't wish to dance." There was a pause, a breath. "Is it madness?" he said softly, to feel more at ease with silence than laughter. Antoinette's throat caught. Her fingers tightened on her skirts. No, she thought. Not madness at all. He spoke more after that, never names, never memories, just thoughts, thrown into the dark like coins into a well. Sometimes he read aloud. Once it was poetry, Byron or perhaps Wordsworth, his voice steady, low, unwilling to betray how much the words stirred him. And Antoinette crouched behind the panel, felt something stir in her too. Weeks passed. She rationed stale bread taken from the pantry in the dead of night, drank from the leaking pipe above the cellar door. She stole only what she must, enough to live, never enough to draw notice. She hid like guilt. She breathed like shadow, and yet she listened. She listened so often she began to anticipate him. She knew when he was restless. She knew when he slept poorly. She knew when his anger dulled into grief. The house creaked with age, but its voice became familiar. The wind down the corridor, the tick of the grandfather clock, the hum of Nathaniel's boots on the eastern stair. Once, in a rare moment of daring, Antoinette peeked through the service grating in the parlor. He was there, standing by the window, jacket unbuttoned, a book in hand he wasn't reading. The light struck him at a slant, painting him in gold and dust. His jaw was tense, his mouth unsmiling, but his eyes, there was sadness in them. Not weakness, not pity, just a quiet kind of ache. And Antoinette, forgotten Antoinette, felt it echo through her like a bell. It was the night of the storm that changed everything. A thunderclap cracked above the manor with such force it rattled the floorboards. The rain hammered the windows in sheets, and the wind howled through the chimney flues, like a woman screaming. Antoinette huddled in her hiding space behind the east gallery, curled in a nest of stolen blankets, heart pounding. Then she heard it, a voice. Not reading, not muttering, calling. "Who's there?" Silence. "I know someone walks these halls," Nathaniel said again, louder this time from the corridor beyond. "I've seen the candles burn lower than I left them. I've heard the whisper of skirts when there was no wind. If you're a spirit, speak. If you're flesh and blood, come out." Antoinette's breath caught. Her hand clutched at her chest. She could say nothing. To speak was death. To be found was ruin. And yet, he waited. And then softly, almost brokenly, he whispered to the darkness, "Please, don't be nothing." Antoinette did not sleep that night. He changed after that. Not wildly, not suddenly, but something softened in him. He paused longer in certain rooms. He left a cup of tea at the hearth as though for someone else. He spoke aloud more often. Once, even laughed. Antoinette, I, unseen, unheard, watched the world shift beneath her feet. She had not meant for this to happen, to care, to ache for his voice, for his footsteps, for the way he sat alone at night, staring at the fire, like a man trying to remember how to be warm. She told herself it was loneliness, that it would pass. But when he spoke to the empty chair in the library and said, "If you're still here, whoever you are, I don't mind the silence anymore," something inside her shattered, because she believed him. The days after the storm unfolded slowly, like parchment curling at the edges over low flame. Nathaniel did not speak to the walls again, not at first. Antoinette waited, pressed against cold stone, listening for the familiar rhythm of his boots in the west wing. They did not come. The study remained still, the chair by the fire untouched. She thought perhaps he had stopped believing, that her silence had closed something he had dared to open. But on the fourth evening, the quiet shattered. He came into the drawing room shortly after sunset. Antoinette was already there, hidden behind the wall, crouched beside the grating. She knew his steps, the pace of a man holding himself together by threads. A door opened. Papers rustled. Then the unmistakable crack of glass as something hit the edge of the hearth. A decanter, maybe, or a tumbler. Nathaniel's voice followed, low and bitter, not spoken into the void this time, but at someone, or something. "Well, they've said it now." His voice cracked. "Ashcombe is mad, talking to shadows, drinking alone, muttering to ghosts. Poor Nathaniel. Poor, bloody, lunatic Nathaniel." He laughed once, sharply. The sound turned hollow before it ended. Antoinette didn't move. She barely breathed. He picked up the letter again. She heard the pages rattle in his hands. "It is with concern, not malice, that I write." He mocked the voice of the sender, exaggerated and cruel. Perhaps a visit to Bath, a change of air, something to ease the mind. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. "So I'm mad now, because I speak where others stay silent, because I feel things they bury." A crash, a chair overturned. His footsteps, angry, uneven, stormed from the room. Antoinette followed the sound in her mind. She knew that direction. Not toward the stairs, not the gardens. Downward, toward the cellar, the old one with the iron hinges and damp air that soaked into the bones. And then, nothing. For 6 hours there was silence. Not even the tick of the grandfather clock dared to intrude. The house held its breath. When the sound came, it was sudden. The splintering of glass, a weight hitting stone, a cry cut short. Antoinette ran. Through the hidden passage. along the narrow stair, out into the storm-soaked dark. Her bare feet slipped on moss-slick flagstones. Wind clawed at her shawl, and there, half slumped across the rear terrace steps, one arm twisted beneath him, blood mingling with rain, lay Nathaniel Ashcombe. "God!" she breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. "Number no, please." He reeked of wine. The bottle lay shattered against the wall. His coat was soaked, his breath shallow. A gash along his temple leaked into the cracks of the stone. Antoinette pressed trembling fingers to his throat. A pulse. Weak, but there. She looked around. She couldn't call for help. She couldn't be seen. But she couldn't leave him. With all the strength she had, she dragged him down the side path into the East Wing's abandoned laundry hall. Years of dust clung to the shelves. She laid him on the stone floor, heart pounding, breath ragged. She tore strips from her petticoat, dipped a cloth into a basin of rainwater near the window, and cleaned the blood from his face. She wrapped his shoulder, adjusted the soaked coat, watched the rise and fall of his chest like it might stop if she looked away. He slept for hours, twitching once or twice. She sat beside him the entire time. When dawn light began to press through the cracks, she stood, pulled his coat gently closed, and slipped a folded note into his breast pocket. "You fell. I caught you. Try not to do it again." The listening girl. She disappeared before he woke. Nathaniel stirred just after sunrise. His head throbbed. His shoulder was wrapped, the bandage firm and precise. A cloth still rested on his brow. Damp, clean. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Slowly, he reached into his coat and found the folded parchment. He opened it, read the words, then read them again. She had been there. She had touched him. He sat very still for a long time, the note pressed in his hand. He did not speak. Some things, even in certainty, felt too sacred to name aloud. That day, the manor shifted. Antoinette felt it in the walls, like something had torn, then mended crookedly. Nathaniel did not speak aloud, but he moved with focus again, opened shutters, touched the door frames as he passed them. In the study he set out 2 cups of tea instead of 1. Antoinette, watching through the cracked panel behind the bookshelf, felt something stir in her chest. Not fear, not pity, something warmer. She returned that night, waited until she heard the first quiet breath of his sleep, then slipped into the room. A second note joined the first, this time under his pillow. "I don't know what this is, but it's keeping me alive." She didn't know that his eyes had opened just enough to see the flick of her skirt as she vanished through the curtain. He lay in the dark after, holding the note in one hand and whispering to no one. Then, "Don't leave." After the fall, after the bandages, after the note tucked inside his coat, something began to shift inside Nathaniel Ashcombe. Not all at once, but with the quiet certainty of ice thawing beneath early spring. He no longer questioned whether she was real. She had touched him. He had felt the care in the way his shoulder was wrapped. The scent of lavender still lingered faintly in the cloth left on his brow. She had been there, and she had saved him. And yet she was still a ghost, a presence that moved like wind through the manor, leaving only whispers behind. He didn't know her face, or name, or where she disappeared to, but he knew her. He still walked the halls alone, still drank too much, still snapped at the steward and refused visitors. But now and then, his gaze would linger at the corners of rooms. He would stop mid-sentence, as if listening. Once, he left a book open on the parlor table, not a title he was known to read. On the page, underlined in pencil, a single line: "I am half agony, half hope." Antoinette found it. She traced the line with her fingertip and closed the book, slowly. She didn't take it. She left it for him to see that she had read it. That night, she left no note, only a daisy picked from the overgrown garden wall. placed on the open page. When Nathaniel saw it the next morning, he didn't speak, but he smiled. A quiet thing, barely there. It didn't reach his eyes, but it softened his shoulders. The dance between them continued, wordless but sharp as music. Sometimes she left him passages, sometimes he left her riddles. Each small exchange was a heartbeat shared between walls. She began to believe it might last, that this strange communion, this closeness without closeness, was enough. Until the day someone almost discovered her. It was the steward, Mr. Kemple, a man who measured worth in ledgers and corners of linen, left unpressed. That morning, he'd noticed a box of silver polish missing from the supply closet. Harmless, but unusual. Servants did not take things without report, and servants did not linger in the unused wings. He began inspecting. Antoinette heard the creak of his shoes from inside the narrow crawl space behind the tapestry hall. She froze. She had not eaten since morning. Her legs were cramping. Her back ached. She held her breath as Kemple's steps drew closer to the wall. Then, blessedly, a call came from downstairs. One of the maids had dropped a pitcher. Footsteps receded. Antoinette didn't move for 20 minutes. When she did, it was only to crawl deeper into the dark. That night, she left Nathaniel no note. Not because she didn't want to, but because fear had returned, crawling down her spine like cold water. She had stayed too long. One wrong breath and everything would collapse. Nathaniel noticed her silence. He waited in the study, 2 teacups cooling side by side. He lingered in the hallway, stood too long near the base of the stair. At last, he placed a note on the edge of the window frame, visible only if someone were watching from within the walls. "Don't vanish again." I've already imagined it too many times. Antoinette's hand shook as she read it in the dark. The next morning, she wrote her reply on the back of the same page. "I was almost caught. You would not have forgiven me if I had stayed." She left it in the basket of firewood outside his chamber door. Nathaniel read it the moment he found it. He folded it once, then again, then pressed it flat against his chest before tucking it away. He stopped speaking to the house that day. Instead, he began speaking directly to her. "I don't know what you are," he said one afternoon while seated in the library, eyes on the fire. "But I know what I am when I think of you, and I'm tired of silence. I'm tired of pretending there's nothing in this house worth listening to." Antoinette heard every word. Hidden behind the panel, pressed between wood and stone, she felt her lungs constrict. No one had spoken of her that way since the day her name had been dragged through the mud. She had spent months being nothing, just a shadow, just a fugitive. Now, he was calling her real. That night, she lit one of the study's candles, just one, and left it burning, though no one had entered. When Nathaniel returned, he stared at the flickering flame in silence. He did not blow it out. The next morning, a storm came in from the west. Rain lashed the manor, and the wind sang through the chimney flues like grief. The staff kept to the lower floors. The house grew still. Antoinette retreated to her safest hiding place, the forgotten servants' chamber tucked behind the east wing linen hall. Only one entrance. No light, no air, but safer than the panels, and warmer. She had made it her own. Her blankets, her hidden diary, a cracked piece of mirror, even a little vase made from an old inkwell. She called it the secret room. There she curled up that afternoon and listened to the storm howl beyond the walls. Hours passed. Then she heard it. Not Nathaniel's voice, not a call, footsteps, software hesitant, then a knock. She froze. "Are you there?" Nathaniel's voice was low, almost unsure. "I don't know where you go, but I think this is close." Silence. He didn't press the door, didn't pry, just waited. Then very softly he said, "If I asked you to show yourself, would that ruin it?" Her breath caught. She did not answer. She couldn't. The moment was too much. Too close. He waited a little longer. "I'll leave something outside. If you want it, it's yours." She heard the quiet thud of a package being set on the floor. By the time she crept out 3 hours later, soaked with fear and trembling, it was still there. Inside, a scarf. Wool. Deep green. The same color as the book she had once underlined. Folded neatly. Not a gift. Not a bribe. Just warmth. And beneath it, a note. No more riddles. "I want to know you." Whatever that means. She brought the scarf to her face. It smelled like smoke and rain. And for the first time in months, she wept. At precisely 6:30, the knock came. 3 short raps. Firm, familiar. Nathaniel Ashcombe glanced up from his writing desk, candlelight flickering across the unopened letter before him. "Come," he said. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Tilley, the old housekeeper who had served the Ashcombe estate since before he wore his first riding boots. She stood with her hands folded neatly over her apron, eyes steady beneath graying brows. "Forgive the interruption, sir," she said, voice soft with age, but always clear. "But I wish to remind you, the kitchen staff, most of the grooms, and even Thomas will be heading into the village shortly." She hesitated, then added, "You'll be the only soul in the manor tonight. Well, aside from the dogs." Nathaniel arched a brow. "A town supper? Parish social," she said. "Vicar's wife has planned it for months. Music, bread, nothing grand." Her expression softened. "You've always been generous with your staff, sir. They don't forget that." He nodded once, dismissing her with a quiet murmur. "Have them enjoy themselves. I'll be riding into town myself, just for a few hours." Mrs. Tilley's eyes lingered. Perhaps she saw the strain beneath his civility, or the tiredness in his posture. But she said nothing more, only bowed her head and pulled the door gently shut behind her. In the walls, Antoinette heard every word. She stood frozen behind the library panel, hands pressed to her skirts, heart thudding. Alone. The manor would be empty tonight. No footmen, no kitchen maids, no lanterns flickering outside her hiding place. Just the dogs. And her. From her narrow view at the attic grating, she watched the carriage roll out a half-hour later. The great manor gates creaked open. Nathaniel's dark silhouette climbed inside, shoulders straight, coat collar turned against the wind. The horses snorted, their breath misting, and then he was gone. She waited. 10 minutes. Then 20. The silence held. And then, against every warning whisper in her mind, Antoinette moved. She descended through the hidden passage with careful steps, skirts brushing against the stone walls, past the east stair, through the disused linen hall. Along the edge of the servants' wing, she paused, then slipped quietly into the old laundry quarters. A trunk stood near the far wall, half covered in dust. Inside were 2 clean but aged maids' uniforms, forgotten by time. She took one. The fabric was worn but serviceable. She slipped it on quickly, adjusting the apron and collar with shaking hands. It smelled of starch and rose water. It fit well enough. She continued forward, into the west wing. The floor creaked once beneath her, and she paused, breath caught. But nothing stirred. The house was still. She entered his chamber through the servants' alcove, where the wall panels slid open behind a wardrobe. The room smelled faintly of cedar, ink, and smoke. A book lay open on the desk. His gloves rested beside it, fingers curled slightly inward. A scarf hung from the chair. The fire had burned down to embers. Antoinette stood at the foot of his bed for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, knelt carefully, and reached beneath his pillow. From the pocket of her apron, she pulled the folded square of paper she'd written by candlelight in her hiding place. It was not a confession, not a farewell, just a ripple of laughter in ink. "So they say I'm mad, talking to shadows." And here I thought I was charming. The listening girl. She slipped it under the pillow with a breathless laugh, stood, and vanished back into the walls. Nathaniel returned just before midnight. He climbed the stairs alone, boots echoing in the empty corridors. His coat was damp with mist. He looked older somehow, his shoulders heavier than when he had left. The dogs stirred at the doorway but did not bark. He removed his gloves with slow hands, pulled the scarf from his neck, sat on the edge of the bed with a tired sigh, and pressed his palm against the pillow, and felt it. Paper. He froze. For a heartbeat he did not move. Then slowly, as though the very air might shatter if he rushed, he reached beneath the pillow and drew out the note. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. So, they say I'm mad, talking to shadows, and here I thought I was charming. His hand dropped to his lap. He stared at the words for a long time, then lifted them again, adjusted his spectacles, read them once more, and again. A sound escaped him. Half laugh, half breath. Then he stood abruptly and crossed the room in 3 strides, fists clenched. He turned toward the far wall, the one near the fireplace, the one with the wainscoting that never quite matched the others. He knocked. Once, twice, then louder. "I know you're there." Silence. "I know you hear me." His voice was tight, uncertain, threaded with something raw. "You've been listening to everything, haven't you?" Still no reply. "You stitched me back together, then left me wondering if I had dreamed it. You mock me now with my own words." His voice cracked. "Do you know what that does to a man?" He pressed his palm flat to the wood, leaned in slightly. "You are invading my privacy," he said, "and I don't know whether to be furious or grateful." A pause. "But you'd best be ready for whatever penalty comes with that choice." Another silence followed, but this time it was heavier. It was no longer a man talking to emptiness. It was a man who knew someone was breathing just beyond the wall. She had stood there by the hidden panel, heart pounding from what she'd just heard. For a fleeting moment, Antoinette wanted to burst through the wall and cry out, "I'm here! I'm here!" But reason pulled her back. How foolish she would look, falling for a man who didn't even know she existed. Surely what she felt was infatuation. Nothing more. She thought of her cousin. After the first few weeks at the manor, after too many nights of crusted bread and cold water from the cellar pipe, Antoinette had finally crept out under cover of darkness. Hunger had become sharper than fear. Her cousin had been stunned to see her, gaunt, damp and trembling, but pulled her inside without question. She fed her, wrapped her in wool, and listened. Since then, Antoinette had returned in secret every few nights to collect what food she could carry. That's how she survived now, not on stolen crumbs, but on mercy. During that first visit, her cousin had warned her. "You can't stay in that house forever," she'd whispered. "Someone might recognize you. Go to Uncle's. It's safer there." Antoinette had nodded. She even said yes. But she hadn't gone. Not yet. That very night, after nearly running through the wall to reach him, her heart still pounding from what she'd heard, Antoinette slipped out once more into the cold. And now, walking through the dark again, Antoinette's heart pounded louder than her steps. What if tonight is the night I'm caught? What if someone sees me on the road? She clutched the scarf tighter around her shoulders. She had thought about going to their uncle 100 times. He lived far enough. He would take her in. But what if they stopped her on the way? What if someone in the village had heard the lies? The whispers Sir Alistair planted like weeds. They believed him. Of course they had. A governess, alone, accused of theft and seduction. What was her word against his? She'd be dragged before a magistrate. Or worse, thrown into a workhouse. Branded. Named a liar, a whore. No references, no future. They wouldn't even need proof, she thought bitterly. Just a name, just a face. That's why she'd stayed hidden so long. That's why she'd chosen moldy bread over fresh air. Because fear was safer than hope. I could do it, she whispered aloud, trying to believe it. I could leave tomorrow. Just not tonight. Her cousin would be waiting. She would give her more food. She always did. After tonight. I'll go after tonight. But just then, she heard it. Footsteps. Behind her, not hurried, measured, closing in. She froze. The only thought that came to her mind was the green scarf. She clutched it to her chest like it might somehow erase her. No, no, not now. Her legs tensed, ready to run. But she was too late. Two cloaked men seized her before she could scream. They had been watching. They knew where she'd go. The cousin, though loyal, had not known they were followed. And just like that, Antoinette vanished into the dark. It was dawn at Greymore Hall. The kind of dawn that crept over the moors like a cold breath, mist clinging to the windows, and the scent of rain still fresh on the stone paths. Inside the manor, the halls remained silent, save for the occasional sigh of the wind pressing through a loose shutter. And as he had done every morning for the past fortnight, Baron Nathaniel Ashcombe made his quiet pilgrimage. He moved through the east corridor, boots hushed by the worn runner beneath him. He held a note in his hand, folded, sealed, still warm from his pocket. But when he reached the panel in the wall, his step faltered. The one from yesterday was still there, untouched. His eyes lingered on it, and for a breath, the world held still. Then, with a quiet motion, he removed the old letter and placed the new one in its place, as he did every day, without fail. He did this not out of habit, but hope. 2 weeks had passed since her last reply. 2 weeks of silence that scraped against his thoughts like a blade. And still, he wrote. Some were gentle questions. Have I offended you? Did my words frighten you? Are you toying with me? Others were softer, like echoes from the ache in his chest. Your silence is worse than madness. You've left me wondering if I ever imagined you. I miss the shape of your presence in a room, even if I never truly saw it. One, only 2 days ago, read simply, I would very much like to meet you, even if only for a moment, even if you hate me. Each letter folded with care. Each one slipped beneath the panel. Each day he returned, and each time he found the previous still resting there, unanswered. The staff began to notice. They did not speak of it aloud, but Mrs. Tilly's eyes lingered longer on his face at breakfast. The footman, Henry, would glance down the hall before announcing him. Servants exchanged quiet looks. It was as though the manor itself had grown heavy with waiting. But Nathaniel did not stop. Not yet. For something inside him, some thread pulled tight, refused to believe she was gone. The ghost behind the wall had become his heartbeat, and he would not let her go without one final cry into the silence. Not yet. That night, he returned to his chamber and sank into the chair beside the fire. The flames cast a wavering glow across his face as he turned the latest note over in his hand, creased at the edges from being read too many times. Am I a fool? He asked the fire, voice low. Who does this? What kind of man falls in love with a ghost behind a wall? He gave a bitter, breathless laugh. No true lady would torment a man like this. Would she? Then, with the careless ache of someone who no longer cared how he landed, he threw himself onto the bed, like a boy struck by first heartbreak. I don't even know what she looks like, he muttered into the empty room. But I miss her. Quieter then, almost to himself. I miss the ghost. He closed his eyes and breathed in the memory she'd left behind. The faintest trace of rose oil, and something softer, something only she wore. It was madness, but it was his. And in the silence, as the fire hissed and the wind pressed against the glass, Nathaniel grieved her absence the way one grieves a wife who never said goodbye, as if a future had died quietly in the night. He had been restless all night. Sleep would not come. Not since the last note had been left unanswered. Not since the emptiness in the hallway had begun to feel like a closing door. And so, just before dawn, around 3 in the morning, Nathaniel mounted his horse and rode. He told himself it was for an old deed Lawrence Allister might still have, but in truth, he didn't know what he was hoping for, only that he couldn't sit still. His half-brother, Lawrence Allister, was the kind of man who gambled through the night, slept through the day, and kept strange hours in between. It wouldn't be unusual for him to be awake at such an hour, or missing entirely. So when the opportunity came to visit his estranged half-brother, Lawrence Allister's estate, under the excuse of retrieving an old deed, he went. He did not expect anything, and yet he couldn't explain the urgency with which he rode, or why his hand trembled when he reached the great oak doors. "Lawrence," he called as he stepped inside. "Are you here?" The house was empty. Not abandoned, just still, like the pause before a storm. He wandered through the lower floor, calling his brother's name once more, then paused. A sound, faint, from below. He followed it, down the servants' corridor, past the wine stores, to a heavy wooden door set low in the stone wall. It had a rusted iron bolt and a handle shaped like a lion's head. Behind it, he swore. He heard breath, a groan. He unlatched it, descended the creaking stairs, and froze. The cellar was dark save for a shaft of light through a barred opening. And there, chained to the wall by wrists raw and red, sat a figure, hunched and motionless. Her dress was torn, her face obscured by grime. But the moment his eyes adjusted, he saw it. Around her neck, threadbare, muddied but unmistakable, was a green scarf. Not just any scarf. His scarf, the one he had pressed between the folds of a note so many weeks ago. There, near the hem, faded but clear, was the small red emblem with his family's initials, stitched by his mother's hand years before. His breath hitched. Panic sparked in his chest. His mind reeled with disbelief. Was it her? Could it truly be? "Where did you get that shawl?" he asked, stepping closer, voice trembling. The woman stirred. Her lips cracked, her voice dry as dust, but she managed to whisper, "You gave it to me." His heart stopped. The world tilted. In that moment, the truth fell into place like the final piece of a long-lost puzzle. It was her. A wave of emotion crashed over him. Anxiety, joy, disbelief. He felt like a man waking from a long gray dream into sudden color. He had not known what she looked like, yet now that he saw her, it was as though his soul recognized her. The girl behind the wall. The echo that had answered his loneliness. She was real. Flesh and blood, and she was here. But why? And how? Why in Lawrence Allister's cellar? He did not understand, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He had found her, and he would never lose her again. She slumped again. He found the key on a high shelf, just out of reach. A cruel game. He unlocked her chains, gently lifting her into his arms. She was weightless. Frighteningly so. He didn't wait, didn't stop. He carried her up the steps, out the door, and straight to his horse. By the time he reached Ashcombe Manor, dawn was breaking. Mrs. Tilly was already up. She gasped at the sight of Antoinette in his arms, but asked no questions. "Draw a warm bath. Bring milk, blankets, and tea," he barked, not cruelly, but with urgency. Together they cleaned her wounds, dressed her in fresh linen, laid her beneath the warmest quilts in the house. That night, Nathaniel never left her side. He sat by her bed, watching the rise and fall of her breath, like it was the only rhythm keeping him alive. And in the low hush of candlelight, he whispered, He looked down at her sleeping face and said, "You haunted me. In every hallway, in every breath." I waited by that panel like a fool, hoping for a note, a whisper, anything. When your silence grew longer, I thought I was losing my mind. But even madness felt better than the emptiness. He paused, his voice thick. "Each morning I wrote you again, not knowing your name, not knowing if you'd ever reply. But I had to believe you were there, because without you, there was nothing. You were never a ghost," he said, brushing a lock of hair from her temple. "You were hope. You were the sound in the silence, the only thing I looked for each morning." His voice cracked as he added, "I didn't know I could miss someone I never touched, but I did. God, I did. And now you're here, and I don't know if I'm dreaming, but if I am, let me never wake." Mrs. Tilly, just outside the door, heard every word and smiled to herself. "Speak those words when she wakes, sir," she called softly. It would mean the world if she heard them. He chuckled quietly, and as he turned back to Antoinette's pale face, he felt something shift, not just relief, but love, unmistakable. The morning light crept through the heavy curtains, dim and honeyed, casting a warm glow across the room. Antoinette stirred. Her eyes fluttered open slowly. The first thing she saw was the carved wooden beams of the ceiling above, then the faint outline of rain, tracing soft paths down the glass window. She blinked once, then again, her breath catching. He was there. Nathaniel sat in the chair beside her bed, head bowed, one hand resting on his knee, the other loosely holding a damp cloth he had used earlier to cool her brow. He looked exhausted, as though he had been there all night. His cravat was undone, coat draped across the arm of the chair, his dark hair tousled with sleep. She turned her face slightly, her voice hoarse but teasing. "You look more handsome than the first time I saw you." His head snapped up. He leaned forward so quickly she thought he might fall. "You're awake." She nodded slowly, and then coughed. Immediately his hand was at her side, steadying her, his brows furrowed in concern. He looked like he might have panicked if she coughed again. She smiled. "It's just a cough, not a spell." He laughed, soft and relieved. "Well, let's not test fate." Their eyes met. Something long suppressed rose between them, warm and unspoken. He took her hand, held it as though it might vanish if he didn't. "Antoinette, I won't wait another moment. I've already waited longer than a man ought to. I care for you, deeply." She opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand gently. "Let me say it, before I lose the nerve. I would ask to court you properly, but I suspect we've crossed the border of propriety weeks ago. Still, I want it said, clear and true." She was quiet a moment, then tilted her head with a tired smile. "And how do you propose we do that, my lord? Courtship through keyholes, love letters under floorboards?" His smile widened. "Exactly that." She gave a breathy laugh, and it turned into a cough again. He rose and helped adjust her pillow, brushing back a curl from her forehead. She touched his hand before he pulled away. "Nathaniel, I never thought I'd be safe again." He pressed her fingers to his lips. "Rest now. We'll speak more when you're stronger." She closed her eyes, the faintest smile on her lips, and he sat back, still watching her, guarding her rest as though it were the most sacred thing he'd ever known. 2 days later, once Antoinette had regained some strength, Nathaniel returned to her bedside with the same chair and a heart full of questions. That evening, they spoke of everything. She told him how she had come to hide in the manor walls, how she had survived, and why she ran from Lawrence Allister. And he told her the truth. Lawrence was his half-brother, but no brother of his now. He rode back the next morning to confront Lawrence. What was said, no one knew. But Nathaniel returned alone and calm. In the days that followed, Antoinette healed. And in the garden of Ashcombe Manor, He proposed with his mother's brooch turned into a ring. They wed beneath the ash tree, and every now and then, Nathaniel would still leave a note tucked into odd places, just to hear her laugh, just to remember. She had been the girl behind the wall. Now, she was his wife, and the house was full again.
There was silence in the stone, cold wind in the halls. I lived in the shadows and no one heard my calls, but a whisper found me from a world far above. In the smallest of letters, he taught me to love. Behind the walls, a heart still beat. In broken light, two souls did meet. You never saw my face at all, but still you came. Behind the walls, you called my name. He never knew my name, but he gave me his trust. When the days grew quiet, he believed I was dust. Yet here in his arms, I finally know a love that grew silent now starts to glow. Behind the walls, a heart still beat. In broken light, two souls did meet. You never saw my face at all, but still you came. Behind the walls, you called my name. To be seen, not as a ghost, but something between. A memory, a dream, a voice in the seam. Now you are mine and I am redeemed. Behind the walls, a heart still beat. In broken light, two souls did meet. You never saw my face at all, but still you came. Behind the walls, you call my name.